Purchasing a MacBook is really difficult with so many options out there. M1 MacBook Air, M2 MacBook Air, M2 MacBook Pro, M1 Pro MacBook Pro 14-inch, M1 Pro MacBook Pro 16-inch. What do all these numbers and letters mean? It can be a mess to figure out. So that's what I'm going to be trying to help with today. I've owned or used most of these machines for a decent amount of time, and here's my thoughts on each of them. Let's get started. I made a very similar video like this one, like 4 or so months ago, but with Apple adding 2 new laptops into the mix, I think it's really changed how I've viewed their whole lineup. Because now there's more options in the Mac lineup than ever. So we'll be going through all of Apple's laptops, from the cheapest to the most expensive. This starts us off with the MacBook Air lineup. Apple sells 2 different versions, the M1 MacBook Air and the M2 MacBook Air. I actually have separate reviews on my channels for each of these machines if you're interested, but to summarize, the M1 MacBook Air is Apple's cheapest laptop. The M2 MacBook Air is more of a redesign of this M1 machine and with a higher price tag to match. To be honest with you, I think the best value when it comes to Apple's laptops right now is the M1 MacBook Air. It's the oldest laptop in the Apple lineup, but it's also on sale pretty often, especially here in the US, where you can find deals ranging all the way from $750 to $900 USD. The M1 Air is a crazy good value and will definitely meet most people's email, web surfing, video watching, and schoolwork. Actually, for about a year, it was the way that I edited the videos on this channel. It's a pretty competent and tiny guy that can do a lot despite being the cheapest laptop in the MacBook lineup. Now, one thing to note though is that the M2 MacBook Air is the successor to this laptop and has a newer design, meaning if you do end up purchasing the M1 Air, you're kind of missing out on the brand new design that they have for the M2 MacBook Air. For most people though, that won't matter much. I thought I'd just bring that up because, hey, to someone, having the latest design does matter. But overall, this is probably the best machine for those on a budget because it provides you with a great machine that performs 90% the same as the newer model, but for much, much less. The next tier up, you have the M2 MacBook Air. See, this was just released in mid-2022. In fact, my video on this M2 MacBook Air just went live like last week. And this laptop takes everything that was great about the M1 MacBook Air and basically shoves it into a more premium package. The design aligns closer to Apple's latest MacBook Pros with a big notch and squared off design to match. It has the latest M2 chip, a 1080p webcam, and a MagSafe 3 port. Those are just a few of the upgrades that it has. And the MagSafe 3 port gives you an additional way to charge your MacBook. See, this is a magnetic charging cable that just snaps off if your cable gets snagged on something, preventing your charging cable from dragging the entire laptop down with it. And it's a fantastic feature. Not because it helps clumsy people like me, but it also gives you access to use the 2 remaining Thunderbolt ports for whatever you need while you're using MagSafe to charge your laptop. But you can also still charge through the USB port if you need to. So with the M2 MacBook Air, you get more flexibility with that feature. I like to describe the M2 MacBook Air as the MacBook Air Luxe because it's almost the same thing as the M1 Air, but slightly nicer all around. So I think the M2 MacBook Air is for those who fit into that M1 MacBook Air category, right? But want something that has fancier quality of life features like a slightly better display, MagSafe 3 support, an updated design, and a slightly faster chip. So if you're a student, casual laptop user, or even someone starting computer-intensive hobbies who likes the overall thinness of the MacBook Air line, but wants something a little nicer, this is it. Before we get on to the next laptop, let's talk about today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform that lets you basically take as many classes on their site as you'd like for a single monthly fee, helping you invest in yourself and your own personal growth. These classes are done through different video lessons and projects to help you learn more about the many things you're interested in. It could be video editing, productivity, or even how to sew. That's not me, but you do you. So you may know me mostly for my YouTube related content, but recently I've been trying more and more to learn about photography too. Videography and photography are obviously not the same thing despite both using a camera. And on Skillshare, there's a course called Capture the Beauty of Your Surroundings by Min T. And this course has been teaching me so many cool things about photography that I didn't even know about. That's the great thing about Skillshare. It's curated towards learning, so there are no ads in the classes with a subscription. If you're interested in Skillshare, check out the link in the video description below. The first 1,000 subscribers to click on that link will get a 1-month free trial when joining on Skillshare. Anyway, back to the video. Okay, so now let's talk about the elephant in the room. The 13-inch M2 MacBook Pro. It's actually one of the machines that I don't actually have here. It's the cheapest MacBook Pro model in Apple's lineup, and it's also in a really weird position. Apple sells two main lineups of laptops. The Air, which are the ones that we just talked about, and then the Pros. The Air is focused on being thin, light, and normally really good as the average person's computer. And they're also usually Apple's cheaper laptops, while the MacBook Pros focus more on higher end specs, sheer power, and have a big price tag to match. The 13-inch MacBook Pro is neither. It isn't thin, and it isn't light like the MacBook Air, and it isn't as powerful as the 14-inch MacBook Pro. It also utilizes a design from 2016. Here's a clip of my MacBook Pro from 2016, and it has a touch bar instead of function keys that Apple doesn't have on any other laptop anymore. In terms of I/O, for a Pro machine, it's kind of disappointing with only 2 USB-C ports, and just like the MacBook Air line, only supports one external display, meaning it isn't ideal to do Pro-type tasks when you'd want a bunch of things going on, which makes it really hard for me to figure out who that particular laptop is for. It's a faster machine than the M2 MacBook Air because it has a dedicated fan, while the MacBook Air is dead silent because there's no built-in fan. It's just cooled by the environment, but it's also only faster by a little bit. But then it lacks in other ways, right? And you'd probably start looking at the 14-inch or 16-inch MacBook Pro because they provide so much more performance and features when you start to upgrade the 13-inch M2 MacBook Pro. It's like this laptop wants to be a pro machine, but it's not. It's more of a slightly performance-oriented MacBook Air. It's just confusing to me, and it makes my brain hurt trying to figure out who this is for when this thing is more expensive than the M2 MacBook Air, but trades blows with it when it comes to specs and features. All right, I'm about to say a very terrible analogy, but I hope it gets my point across. It's like picking between which Pokemon version to pick at the store. Each one's got minor differences, right? And one game might be a tiny bit better, but are overall really similar. For most people though, I'd still suggest the M2 MacBook Air. Because for one, it's $100 cheaper, it's a newer design, and it has technically more ports. Okay, now that we're done talking with the MacBook Airs, I'm gonna move them out of the way. And we're gonna talk about Apple's 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pro lineup. In my hand right here, I have the 14-inch MacBook Pro. But I will talk about the 14-inch and the 16-inch as a group. These laptops are really similar except for their body, screen, and battery size. Overall spec for spec, if you opt to get the 16-inch version versus the 14-inch version, you'll be paying about a $200 premium for the larger 16-inch body. Okay, so the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pro are by far Apple's most power user-oriented laptops. They come with 3 Thunderbolt ports, MagSafe, HDMI, a headphone jack, and an SD card reader. All the other laptops only have 2 Thunderbolt or USB 4 ports, except for the M2 Air, which also has MagSafe. Also, this lineup is the only one with multiple external monitor support, supporting 2 external monitors on the M1 Pro and supporting up to 4 external monitors on the M1 Max. So if performance, port, and external displays are important to you, the MacBook Pros, the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros are the ones to look at. These MacBook Pros are so good to the point where I'd argue you could get away without needing a desktop computer to supplement it. These are all-purpose machines that will handle nearly anything you toss at them when spec'd right. And in daily usage, they don't get hot doing simple tasks. Battery life is fantastic, but of course, once you put it under heavier tasks, the battery life then just becomes okay, and the system starts to get warm. The 14-inch M1 Pro base model MacBook Pro has been my go-to workhorse machine and handles basically all of my on-the-go YouTube and home life without a hitch. I've owned this machine for nearly a year at this point. I think it's been nearly a year. and it's really, really good. The M1 Pro MacBook Pro always gives me the peace of mind of whatever I throw at it, it'll be able to handle it at least decently or fantastically. I've rarely seen it perform poorly when doing any of my tasks. That doesn't mean that this lineup is perfect though. These MacBook Pros are much thicker and heavier than the MacBook Airs. When you have them hand in hand, the difference is really, really obvious. The MacBook Air machines, the M1 and M2, are so much nicer to carry around different places with you and saves you weight in your backpack. The 14-inch MacBook Pro just feels hefty, but the 16-inch, from my experience holding it in stores, feels like a freaking brick. So when it comes to deciding between the 14-inch or 16-inch MacBook Pro, I'd honestly lean towards the 14-inch Pro. Because if I wanted the extra screen real estate of the 16-inch MacBook Pro, I'd probably already be sitting at a desk and have access to a large external monitor. The 14-inch is much more one-handable and is decently easy to carry around. The 16-inch is a bit more difficult to carry with you on the go and might not fit smaller backpacks in their laptop sleeves. So really, the 16-inch only makes sense to me if you really care about the extra screen real estate, the larger battery, and the nicer speakers. Okay, so at this point, we've basically been through all the different MacBooks. Which one makes sense for you? This is obvious, but it really depends on what you do. I honestly believe the M1 or M2 MacBook Air will serve 90% of people's needs perfectly. That's how good they are. And if you're planning to make a trip to the store, try those out. They are fantastic machines. If you're a student or need a personal computer for emails, documents, or entertainment, then get the M1 MacBook Air. But if you're also using your laptop for a hobby you just started that could use an extra port for charging, maybe you're starting video editing, photography, or even coding, or maybe you want something a little nicer, then get the M2 MacBook Air. It's a nice little upgrade over the standard M1 and gives you a little more flexibility with that nicer screen and MagSafe port. If you're looking for performance above all else, or a machine that will last you a long time, and if cost and weight isn't a factor, the M1 Pro or M1 Max 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros are definitely the way to go. They get as quiet as the MacBook Airs during light loads, but handles the heavy loads well too. They get warm during heavy loads, but never scalding like older MacBooks would get. So to sum it up, if you're a casual user, M1 or M2 MacBook Air. M2 MacBook Pro if you need something with a little more battery life than the M2 MacBook Air, which already has great battery life. And then look at the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pro if performance or keeping your machine for a long time is most important for you. Anyway, what do you personally think? Did this video help you figure out the best laptop for you? Which MacBook do you think it is? Do you think the trade-offs, trading portability for performance and a higher price tag, is worth it? Let me know which one ended up being perfect for you. Leave all that in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and well, I'll see you all next time. Bye.